Bay. Bang, bang, bang. Next time I'm gonna have to add a notification on the stream if once okay, right now I'm just gonna play free for all. We just done eating with the failed pizza that I cook. Apparently I put it in a tray and then I put a foil on it, and then the bread just stick on the foil. So failed. I failed. So how to add notification. Okay, one OBS. But of course, we're gonna do it later after this game. I'm not sure if I'm gonna do the challenge today, but we'll see. We'll try. Yesterday, I tried the revolver challenge, and it didn't end up well.
Free for all. Make every hit count.
Just like that. Look at those shotguns. Holy moly! Alright, we're gonna try to do the revolver. But I think this is not the right map for revolver challenge.
Enemy UAV online.
Ooh, I can't see him. knew it.
Grenade out! Claymore set. Throwing grenade! Enemy VTOL jet inbound. Enemy personal radar online. Enemy UAV online.
Vale.
Dead! Enemy UAV online. Flash out! You're in last place. Step it up. Enemy support helo in the AO. Enemy UAV online. Enemy personal radar online. Less than a minute.
Taking fire!
Enemy counter UAV online. 30 seconds. Time's almost up. We lost.
Yo, what's up, man?
Next one's a different story.
Are you playing COD? I mean, are you gonna play this game? Splinter. You should check this out, bro. It plays pretty well. Just imagine I'm currently streaming 4 platforms right now, and I'm still able to play it on 1440p. So I can say it's pretty much, I mean, it's pretty optimized, I think. Because when I play PUBG and then at the same time I stream with my laptop, I'm not gonna be able to play the PUBG smoothly. I'm gonna get like 20 FPS, but here in COD I can play it like 60 to 70 FPS, so that's very much playable.
You're needed and travel. Enemy.
You should check the Russian store. The only drawback is that you need to create a new account, a Russian account. All you need to do is get yourself a VPN and then connect it to Russia. Then after that, you can browse the store, Battle.net, Russian Battle.net.
They have to retake
so that you can be able to buy it like it's only 25 quid. Yeah. What?
The lead is ours. Keep pushing. That makes 2.
Enemy.
Enemy at the back alley.
Yeah. The only thing is that it's gonna be a new account, but Doesn't matter anyway if you just want to play the COD.
Enemies taking Bravo.
Anyway, I only got a Diablo 3 and Overwatch in my official Battle.net account, so that's
Enemy in
fine.
the pool hall.
We're taking Alpha. We hold all objectives. Keep it that way.
Enemies over there.
Bravo, go. That border. Assist your team at Charlie.
It plays pretty well.
We're off Bravo, stand by. We captured Bravo. You're needed at Bravo.
Enemy in the center.
Allied UAV overhead.
Contact.
Allied precision strike. Beware. Enemies taking Bravo. Friendly VTOL on station for Overwatch. Enemy ahead. Lost Alpha.
Enemy in the turret station.
Shuttle. Capture shuttle. That makes two. The advantage is ours. We're halfway there. Keep going.
Enemy in the pool hall.
We're on Alpha. Stand by. On Alpha. Stand by. Allied cluster strike incoming. Securing Alpha. Assist your team at Charlie. Hold all objectives. Keep it that way. We lost Charlie.
Enemy in the back alley.
Assist your team at Alpha. We're taking Charlie. Assist your team at B. We lost Alpha. Securing C. We're holding Charlie.
Entry spotted in the restaurant.
We have two objectives. Take. We hold all objectives. Keep it that way.
Oh, there's two of them.
Assist your team at A.
What?
We lost A.
What do you mean? What do you mean?
Enemy at the tram station.
Come on. Hey, sit down. And take change. The one up in the.
We have two objectives.
First one, go. First one, first. Go, that one.
Enemy UAV overhead.
And then accept. Yep. And then play.
Enemy at the restaurant.
We are winning. Increase the lead. Enemy UAV overhead.
X-ray spotted.
Back out!
Enemy at the
X-ray
center.
spotted.
You need to click the launch.
Молодцы, ребята. Well done. Command will be pleased.
Just wait. There. You're on. Oh man, that was the last one. Coronin Pro Optic. Let's check that out. It's a 3x. Now I don't usually use 3x, but yeah, let's try it. I'm using more money so that I can have additional experience, just to be able to unlock all the other accessories. And let's check this one. Ghost. So this got a new one. Kill chain. Kill streak kills count towards your next kill streaks, and only applies to kill streaks earned days alive. What? I didn't quite. Well. Hey, it's already started. Yeah, my kid is playing Fortnite, but he's not playing Fortnite. He's only playing Fortnite with the creative.
Team deathmatch. We've got enemy inbound. Lock and load.
Oh, well, I like this one. Ooh, there are lots of them.
Enemy at the playground. Enemy in the yellow building.
Enemy in the yellow building. Yeah. I don't know.
Enemy in the destroyed building.
Maybe it's kind of different now, Prince. Maybe the event was done.
cluster strike incoming. Find cover. Enemy UAV online.
Reloading! I see movement.
How did he got to me that close without me knowing it? Yeah.
Contact!
Enemy cluster strike incoming. Find cover. Enemy UAV online. Friendly UAV. Enemy precision airstrike inbound.
Where are those
Enemy
guys?
at the barber shop.
Contact!
Friendly UAV on station.
Reloading!
Be advised, friendly precision airstrike inbound.
That's why I hate 3X. Really can aim properly. I only like the 1X if I'm not doing a sniper.
Enemy UAV online. Enemy's halfway there. Step it up.
It's not doing quite well.
Enemy!
One up his teeth. Oh, this is about me. This is not my load. This happens every time when you're about to spawn and then you swap weapons.
Enemy UAV online.
Better.
How?
Enemy at the water tower.
Enemy cluster strike incoming. Find cover. Enemy cluster strike incoming. Find cover.
Please cafe.
Oh crap!
Enemy at the water tower.
I'm just gonna do the revolver challenge. What?
Contact!
Enemy in the garage.
Online.
Potato! That was a headshot.
Let's go.
Bring in 5 seconds.
Objective failed. Regroup.
Oh man. Jam, are you gonna play it on mouse and keyboard, or you're just gonna play this on a joystick? I believe you can play this on a mouse and keyboard on your Xbox. Definitely playing it on a mouse and keyboard will be much more enjoyable. It's not used that. I'm quite good with this one. Let's just go for this one yet, and then take the light suppressor. Stock. Ooh, okay. Yeah, that's fine. Since we're not playing free for all, I think it's better if we can change the scavenger to something. Instead of playing scavenger, we're gonna play overkill, and then let's change this. Oh yeah, why not we use a shotgun? Let's try the shotgun.
Headquarters. Capture and defend the headquarters as they come online. HQ identified. Secure the area.
Enemies here.
Ooh. Hey, please.
Enemy at the barbershop.
HQ is online. Secure it. They're capturing the HQ. Go. Enemy personal radar overhead.
Flash out!
We have lost the HQ. We are losing ground. Focus.
Grenade out!
That's your movement.
I will follow.
Disabling the HQ. Keep your eyes open.
Ooh.
Enemy down. I've been hit.
Get on the point.
I will follow.
Down there.
Shutting down the enemy HQ.
Ah! Throwing grenade! Enemy down! Move!
HQ shut down. Regroup. 10 seconds. Get ready to move. Get to the next HQ.
Woo. Lots of them.
Fire!
HQ active. Move to secure. We're taking the HQ. HQ is ours. No reinforcements available. Contested. Trying to shut down our HQ. No available. HQ contested. HQ contested. Trying to shut down our HQ. They disabled the HQ. HQ. Reinforcements inbound. 10 seconds. Get ready to move. New HQ established. HQ is green. Get the move on. Securing the HQ. HQ is ours. No reinforcements available. Enemies. Enemy on the HQ. Command is ours. We can't send reinforcements yet. Hold for the next wave. Disable the HQ. Reinforcements inbound. 10 seconds. Get ready to move. New HQ active. Move out.
Oh crap! It's quite far.
Enemy UAV overhead.
The heck?
HQ is green. Get the move on. They're capturing the HQ. Go.
Yeah, no problem, man. No
Have
problem.
lost the HQ.
I had to stop it as well because we were eating the
Enemies
failed
here.
Enemy at the tire shop.
pizza that I cooked. I failed it.
Enemy personal radar overhead.
Maybe let's play next time.
UAV overhead.
You get well soon, man.
Contact! Enemy at the tire shop.
They've reached the halfway point. Get. Shut down. Enemy personal radar overhead. HQ moving soon. Get ready.
Enemy at the tire shop.
Really? Oh. I hope everything's well, bro.
Move out.
I hope everything's well.
Enemy at the construction site.
Enemy.
Enemy care package inbound. Secure it. Enemy personal radar overhead. We're at the HQ. Stand by. We've secured the HQ. Stay alive. Enemy UAV overhead. HQ contested. Reinforcements yet. Hold for the next wave. HQ disabled. Get ready to move out. HQ moving soon. Get ready.
Oh, that's awful, man. What happened to your bag? Did you fall, sir? Did you fall or something? Prince.
Enemy shield turret on the field.
Prince, that's not good, Prince.
HQ is online. Secure it. They're capturing the HQ. Go. We have captured the HQ.
I hope everything's well.
Enemy at the tire shop.
Enemy shield turret on the field. We're falling behind. Regroup. We have taken the HQ. HQ moving soon. Get ready. Enemy care package inbound. New HQ active. Move out.
Oh, yeah, you should definitely have it checked.
HQ is online. Enemy on the HQ. Move in. Enemy counter UAV.
I had my own fair share of basketball injuries as well.
Shift to fire. The enemy is the trailer.
We're disabling the HQ. Rest your wounds. We return soon.
It must be it must be feeling really good if you can dunk. Well, for me, I can't even jump up in the ring. I don't have the height, and I don't have the. I can't jump that high. That's why all I do is dribble. Oh, I see. As I remember back in the days, we also had a basketball court, and we had it lowered so that we can reach the ring. But as I say, I've had my fair share of basketball injuries. In fact, I missed playing basketball every Friday. Because back when we were in the Philippines, I used to play basketball every Friday with my colleagues. You know that stuff that after office hours, even though how tired you are already, and when you see the court, when you see the ball.
Kill confirmed. Sharpen your teeth.
Suddenly you get all the strength to move. Suddenly you get all the strength to run. you didn't die? What the heck?
We've taken control. Kill confirmed.
Oh, I like this. I like this mode. To be honest, in the Philippines, we really love playing basketball. It's just that we don't have the heights.
Reloading! I'm with you.
Kill confirmed.
Reloading! I'm with you. Reloading!
Enemy at the back alley.
Confirmed.
Fire! Reloading!
Friendly UAV on station.
Target down! Target down!
I like when you said it sounds old, but it was just 7 years. 7 years ago. I can feel that because ever since we got here in the UK, it's like we've been here for like just 3 years. I couldn't even. I don't think I can still run that long. But before that, I used to play every Friday. But right now, I don't think I can run that hard enough
Danger close.
just to play the whole game.
Kill confirmed.
And it's just only been 3 years since we got here. So one time that was on when we were on it's not holiday. Oh, that was a Sunday. One Sunday we booked the court here in our place, and I tried to run and I tried to dribble and I couldn't make it. I feel like I'm pretty heavy already.
Enemy in the courtyard.
We're halfway there. Keep fighting.
Enemy in the car.
That comes with old age. And it's just that I don't have
Strike on the way.
the same activity like before. I'm pretty sure if I maintain that, even just running every like 3 days. Like 3 days in a week, that should keep up the
Enemy at the construction site.
Kill confirmed. Confirmed.
Yeah.
Enemy at the bridge.
That's pretty fast, already.
Friendly UAV on station. Kill confirmed. Kill confirmed.
I guess we can say those were the days.
Enemy at the construction site.
Personal radar online. Enemy personal radar online.
What the heck?
Enemy shield turret online.
Really?
Enemy at the construction site.
Enemy at the cafe.
Enemy
I don't think I can even run that
precision
fast,
airstrike
you
on
know?
the way. You hit the enemy hard. They won't forget it.
Mommy, come over here. Mommy, come over here.
What are you doing?
Mommy, come over here. Mommy, come over here.
What are you doing? What?
Monkey,
What?
monkey.
What monkey? There's a monkey on the flashlight? I can't see it. I don't see it. I can see a monkey holding a flashlight. 15 miles per hour. You know what? I will play basketball if ever I get a chance, but
Search and destroy.
I don't really think I can finish the whole game running. I will probably be able to run like
Daddy,
full court, but
this is zigzag.
yeah. But running the whole game, I don't think I can do that. I don't have the
Door.
Less than a minute.
Yeah, sure, sure. I'm gonna go to bed early tonight because kid has still got school tomorrow. So yeah, see you.
30 seconds. Time's up. Get moving.
And have a good night. Thanks for dropping by.
We took that round. We will take another.
I'm gonna go to bed early tonight as well. That heap shot of shotguns, man.
Search and destroy.
Search and destroy. No.
Defend our objective. Kill the enemy.
Turn off the light. This is your new lamp.
No. I'm streaming.
The lamp.
Yeah, thanks.
Less than a minute. That's a win. Next round. Get ready. Search and destroy. Guard the objectives. The enemy is near.
Search and destroy.
Less than a minute. That's a win. Next round. Get ready. Switching sides. Search and destroy.
Magic turtle.
Take the bomb and destroy the objective. We've got the bomb.
Let's go A. Let's go A.
Planting the bomb. The bomb has been planted.
That's a win. Next round. Get ready. Search and destroy.
Let's go B. Let's go B.
Take the bomb and destroy the objective. Bomb is ours. Destroy the weapon caches.
Watch out.
You have the bomb. Let's go. Planting the bomb. Our bomb is active. Guard it with your lives. Good hunting. Get ready for the next one. Search and destroy.
Everyone go A. Everyone go A.
Take the bomb and destroy the objective. We took the bomb.
Take the tunnel. There's two of them. There's two of them.
Less than a minute. We took the bomb. Bomb planted. Time starts now.
Good luck, bro. Oh, hell. Nice try, nice try.
Bomb defused. They are in control now. A tough prey, this one. Get ready to go back out.
Let's try B again.
Switching sides.
Oh, okay.
Search and destroy.
Good luck.
Defend our objectives. Kill the enemy.
B is clear. They're in A.
Enemy overhead. Less than a minute.
One guy on the B.
Enemy UAV overhead. We're losing ground. Take it back. Search and destroy. Defend our objective. Kill the enemy. Thirty seconds. Time's up. Get moving.
Nice, nice, nice.
Don't deal in fair fights. A win is a win.
I didn't realize I finally unlocked the grenade.
Capture and defend the objective. Securing Charlie. We've got Charlie. The lead is ours. Keep pushing. Securing Bravo.
Hostile
We've got Bravo.
have you. Taking fire!
Enemy in the restaurant.
Enemies taking Bravo.
Reloading.
We're just gonna level the carnage up.
Enemy personal radar overhead. That makes 2. The advantage is ours.
I will follow.
Enemy at the cafe.
Got you.
Enemy in the restaurant.
Over there.
Securing A. Losing Bravo.
Ooh la!
They're done.
Enemy in Bravo, go! We lost Bravo! Enemy UAV overhead. Securing Bravo. Allied UAV overhead. They have 2. Retakes those objectives. Bravo secure. Enemy personal radar overhead.
Target there.
Enemy at the Enemy at the tram station.
Enemies taking Bravo. That makes 2. Advantage is ours.
Enemy.
UAV overhead.
Enemy in the restaurant.
Enemy personal radar overhead.
Enemy in the
Cluster strike.
restaurant.
Take cover.
Enemies here.
Enemy in the restaurant. Enemy at the tram station.
Enemies here.
What the?
Reloading.
Need backup at Bravo. We're halfway there. Keep going.
Enemy in the restaurant.
Securing Alpha. You're needed at sea. Enemy has Charlie. We captured Alpha. Allied UAV overhead. Bravo. Enemy personal radar overhead. We lost B.
Enemy at the center.
We're taking Bravo.
You pay!
They have two. Retake those objectives. Enemy counter UAV. We've lost radar. Enemy UAV overhead. Allied cluster strike incoming. We're on Bravo. Stand by.
I've been hit!
Enemy UAV overhead.
Contact!
Personal radar overhead.
Enemy at the center.
You're needed at Alpha. We're taking Charlie.
Enemy at the restaurant.
Securing B. Enemy personal radar overhead. We've got Bravo. You're needed at A. We lost A.
Enemies
Enemy
hit!
UAV overhead. Assist your team at Bravo. Securing A. We're losing. Retake those points.
Enemy at the center.
Alpha secure. We're losing control.
What? Oh dear.
There you go.
Okay.
Two objectives lost. Move in. Enemy UAV overhead.
Enemies hit!
Enemy precision airstrike. Allied UAV overhead. We're on Charlie. Stand by. Charlie.
X-ray spotted.
Securing B. You're Charlie.
X-ray spotted.
No hold all objectives. Keep it. We lost
Enemy at the
Charlie.
restaurant.
Assist your team at B.
Flash out!
We have two
Contact!
objectives. Take the serve. Losing A.
Flash out!
Enemy has Alpha. This is not over. Get out there and hurt them. We're on Charlie. Stand by. Enemy's taking Bravo. We are losing. Retake
there.
this point. We captured
Enemy
Charlie.
at the center.
GG, guys.
Find your courage.
GG. What? One. Because I'm gonna cook. I'm gonna cook steak. Yeah. For our dinner. Okay, just eat one. What the?
Range agent. Target those vehicles. No go, 3-1. That's too close to friendly.
Domination. Secure the objectives. Securing A. We've got Alpha. We're in the lead.
Flash out! Enemy!
Enemy at the crossroads.
Friendly UAV on station.
Taking fire!
Securing Bravo.
Reloading! Reloading!
Enemy at the crossroads.
We're losing Bravo.
Reloading!
Bravo.
Reloading!
Target those vehicles.
Enemies in the
Enemy
area!
at the cafe.
Enemy's capturing B. We lost Bravo. The enemy has...
Enemy at the construction site.
holds 2 objectives. We're taking Bravo. Enemy's capturing Alpha. We're holding Bravo. Enemy has Alpha.
Multiple contact!
What's your position?
Daddy's taking too long with his laptop.
Hang on, Prince.
We're taking Charlie.
Daddy's taking too long with him.
Charlie secure.
Just hang on.
You're not even listening. You're not. Oh, you're stupid. Just do it.
I'm just gonna finish this.
Enemies in the air!
Taking B. Enemy UAV online. We lost Bravo.
Target spotted!
Losing Charlie. Enemy holds all objectives. Enemy cluster strike. Securing A. We're holding Alpha. Losing A. We're being dominated. Take the enemy personal radar online. We're on Charlie. Stand by. Holding Charlie.
Enemy at the courtyard.
Enemy UAV online. Enemy holds 2
Enemy at the
objectives. Take them back.
Roger, Boomerang.
Securing Alpha. Losing Charlie.
Enemy at the barbershop.
Enemy personal radar online. We lost C. We're losing A.
Enemies in the area!
Securing Charlie.
No go, 3-1.
Securing C. We hold 2 objectives. Keep them. We're losing B.
Enemy at the bridge.
We're capturing Charlie. We're dominating the enemy.
Target down!
Lost Bravo.
Enemies in the air!
We're losing Alpha.
Ashley, what's your position?
We lost A.
Enemy at the barbershop.
No 6, got 1-4-1.
the run.
The enemy controls 2 objectives. They're gaining ground. Charlie! Enemy hold. We're losing this fight. We're on Bravo. Stand by.
Enemies in the area!
Securing A. We're holding Charlie. Alpha secure.
Cafe.
Enemies capturing Charlie.
Umano na rin.
Reloading.
Friendly UAV on station.
Reloading!
Enemy at the crossroads.
Precision airstrike inbound. Enemy personal radar online. We're only 2. We have the advantage. Enemy has Charlie.
Enemies in the area! Reloading!
We're capturing Bravo.
Enemy at the
Captured
cafe.
Bravo. We're losing Alpha. Securing C. We're dominating the enemy. We lost Alpha. Enemy care package inbound.
No 6, got 141.
The enemy is taking B. The enemy is taking B. We're capturing Alpha.
Enemy at the bridge.
Wilson deployed. Enemy personal radar online. We're dominating the enemy. Moving
Still
C.
firing.
Enemy at the crossroads.
Enemy's taking Bravo. We lost Bravo. We lost C.
Contact!
Enemy at the construction site.
Bravo. We're on Charlie. Stand by.
Hit the infantry.
We're losing this fight. Get your head. Charlie. Enemy UAV online.
Contact!
Enemy at the buses.
I'm hit!
We're losing Charlie. We lost C. Care package
Enemy
inbound.
at the bridge.
Securing Charlie. We're taking Bravo. Mission failed. We'll come prepared next time.
Yeah, what's up, man? Yo, what's up, Nani? How you doing? Glad you're still there. Jam. Say hi to Nani. You came up late, Nani Kiniko. We had a match with Sly X. So this probably be my last match for tonight because I have to cook a dinner, and the kid has still got school tomorrow, so gotta be probably going to bed early. And thanks for staying, Jam and Nanny. I'm not sure if Sly X is still there, but yeah.
Target those vehicles. No go, 3-1. That's too close to friendly. Calling and found, this is 3-1. Roger, Boogaloo 2. Hammer is visual on that position.
Went to bed late. Yeah, you went to bed late as well. All right.
Team deathmatch. You are clear to prosecute all targets.
You are clear to prosecute all target.
Setting Claymore! I'm with you.
We've got control.
I'm with you. I got movement.
We lost the lead. Fight harder. Control. We lost the lead. Fight harder.
Oh, really?
Enemies here.
No, wake up late as well. We wake up like 10 in the morning.
Taking control.
Enemies in the area. Taking fire.
4-1, you've got enemies in.
Enemy movement. Reload.
Have you got a coffee already? Did you had your coffee?
We've lost the lead.
Enemy at the Palace Dome.
We're in the lead. Enemy UAV online. We've got control.
Yeah, me as well. I usually have coffee after I wake up, and had some croissant. The day is not complete without coffee. Yeah. I'm just here trying to level the car 98 so that I can unlock the scopes.
Enemy at the Palace Dome.
Enemy UAV online. Enemy precision airstrike inbound.
Changing mags.
We've lost the lead. Enemy's halfway there. Step it up. Friendly counter UAV active. Enemy personal radar online.
Enemy at the Palace Dome.
Enemy UAV online.
Wrong way, wrong way.
Enemy at the
Enemy
cargo
chopper
container.
gunner inbound.
Enemies in the
Enemy
area.
at the Palace Dome.
Enemy cluster strike incoming.
Whew, shotgun.
With the infantry.
Enemy IAV on the deck.
Keep getting lost on this map.
Enemies in the area.
Enemy UAV online.
I'm hit.
Friendly UAV on station.
Getting Claymore.
Enemy at the Palace Dome.
Contact.
Really? That's so sad, Nani. I feel bad.
We got movement.
Hope you're okay, bro.
Changing mag.
Oh man, I feel bad for asking. I'm so sorry.
Counter UAV active. Enemy sentry gun active.
Enemy.
Get it together. This ain't over yet. Less than a minute.
Enemies in the area.
I'm calling it.
that's
Back up,
it for
we're
tonight,
RTB.
bro. And I'm gonna have to cook dinner for the kid. Right, I'm gonna have to cook dinner for the kid and probably gonna go to bed tonight. I'm not sure if I can still stream after dinner, but we'll see. And thanks once again, Jam and Nanny and Slyax for staying. And have a good day and have a good night and goodbye for now. So see you again tomorrow. Bye. All right.